Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another in our Versus series where I take two previously reviewed rifles, pit them up against each other and try and help you come to some sort of conclusion as to which one might be the better option for you. And today we have not one but two offerings from G&G. Both are SMGs, both are based on real world, real steel platforms. Both have folding stocks, and that's about as far as I can take this particular description without diving straight in. So without further ado, let's begin. So as you may have been able to ascertain from the title of this video, today's weapons are in fact the UMP45 and the PCC45. In the case of the UMP45, it does sometimes retail in the UK as the SMG45, probably likely down to licensing reasons alone. And as you will know, this is quite obviously the H&K UMP45, which has seen adoption by such units as the SWAT team in America and general law enforcement, to my knowledge, as well. The PCC45, on the other hand, is, in my mind at least, an unlicensed replica of the LWRC SMG45, a civilian-based weapon. It hasn't seen any adoption by any military units, to my knowledge, thus far. Now, in terms of size, as you'll see, there is very little difference between these two offerings. We are literally talking about 3 to 4 centimeters in total. They both have a very similar silhouette in terms of the magazine placement, certainly the spacing of the trigger or the pistol grips to the trigger. And obviously the stocks at the rear are pretty much identical, certainly in terms of design, pull and length, and overall structure. So in terms of build, how do these two differ? Well, not greatly, I'd have to admit. The UMP45 is entirely polymer front to back. This is actually a whole one piece in terms of the upper receiver, then you get a separate polymer lower and obviously the stock at the rear. In the terms of the PCC45, we actually get a metal handguard up at the front, and then we return to the polymer systems at the upper and lower receivers and the stock to the rear as well. Both guns enjoy basically no wobble whatsoever. In terms of the UMP45, this is probably largely down to the fact that it is a one-piece upper. There's no flex, the polymer is extremely strong, and yeah, no creaks, no wobbles, no rattles at all. In terms of the PCC45, I have to admit, it is much the same story. G&G have done a very good job of integrating the handguard into the upper receiver. As you'll be able to see here, it does actually have a small cutout so that it conjoins and locks into place very, very nicely. And this ensures, again, that we have no fitment issues, no wobbles, no rattles of any kind. Both of these are extremely solid options. So let's take a look at some of the features that may differentiate on the two weapons and help you to come to a conclusion about them. Starting off at the front, let's take a closer look at the UMP45. Now, in my UMP45 review, you'll remember that I wasn't a particular fan of the bell housing up at the front here. This is, again, truly authentic to the real UMP45. It does have this bell housing. But what we then are left with from an airsoft perspective is a 12mm positive, I believe, thread, which is much more akin to a pistol setup. So not indicative to your 11mm counterclockwise threads on any sort of standard tracer. You will need quite possibly just a standard pistol adapter for the threads up at the front there. So that's, for me, a slight downside, but not a killer to the weapon at all. But when we compare it to the the PCC45, what we see is that they've taken the same sort of chunky end that you would enjoy on the UMP45, that sort of 45 APC look to the barrel, but they've actually housed it inside a thread protector, and you are provided with really a copious amount of threads. But we are provided with 11mm counterclockwise threads underneath, so then we can just throw a tracer on or anything we want, whether it's a particularly nice flash hider or anything along those lines. Let's talk about iron sights. Now, these are, being from G&G, these are on the PCC45, are very akin to the same sort of setup you will find on your ARP9 and such. It's basically taken from the buckets at G&G. They've thrown on a standard set of iron sights, and I've got to say, these iron sights are particularly good out of the box. I do like them. They work well with masks, full face masks and that kind of thing, because they are quite high. On the other end of that scale, when we look at the UMP45, again, from an authenticity perspective, it's very good. We get the standard iron sights you would find on the real UMP45, with the sort of hooded front end and the almost akin to a pistol setup at the rear with just a small set of grooves. I don't like it personally. I find it a bit wishy-washy, and certainly when I run the UMP45, the first thing I do is throw an optic on the top of it. But that's personal preference. They do work, don't get me wrong, and I'm sure users of the real world UMP45 will tell you that they are perfectly serviceable iron sights. But I do find the flip up ones on the PCC45 to be slightly better for full face masks. Let's talk about rail space. So obviously on the UMP45 you would usually find that we would have Picatinny rail at the 3 and 9 positions. Mine doesn't. I've talked about it before. Mine never came with any pick rails. It was a bargain basement thing. But they do, as standard, come with pick rails. And obviously you have a pick rail at the bottom as well, and we have a shortened pick rail along the top for an optic of your choice or preference. So we've got all the Picatinny space we could ever desire, really. However, I do find again, personal preference, I do find that the UMP45 has a slightly enlarged front end that works better, certainly if you're trying to C-clamp it being naked to some degree. Whereas when we look at the PCC45, you can see back to back it is a much narrower prospect across that profile, and it's just a bit more comfortable to C-clamp. Now, that's not saying you're necessarily going to C-clamp it. You may prefer to hold it by the magazine, some people, or you might chuck an M-Lock foregrip on the front, that kind of thing. And we do have a lot of M-Lock space real estate here as well. The thing I do like is the monolithic Picatinny rail across the top on the PCC45. Just gives you a few more options with things like PEC boxes, or if YouTubing is your particular preference, then cameras and stuff. There's a bit more rail space for that sort of thing. It's worth noting though that this M-Lock is not real on the back. You can't attach anything, and who would want to? Anyway, but yeah, so both guns have a good amount of real estate. I would argue that the monolithic rail is perhaps more usable, certainly for the C-clamper, and the front end of the gun in general, just being that little bit narrower, is a bit more comfortable to hold. Charging handles. The PCC45 charging handles are back here, and as you can see, they do this rather cool kind of flip out affair. Very nice. My only concern, and it locks back, I should add, as well, to provide you access to the hop-up. My only concern is that they feel ever so slightly flimsy, and I would be slightly concerned that this whole mechanism is going to fail at some point. Not to say it will, mine hasn't, but then I tend to have a slightly gentler touch with these things. My children, on the other hand, would wreck this within minutes, I'm sure. So we have an actual usable bolt release, which allows everything to slide forward, makes a satisfying noise. But yeah, something to be aware of. I do feel like that is potential for failure at some point, especially in the wrong hands. The UMP45 has the more traditional H&K style charging handle up front, very akin to your MP5 and your MP5 slaps and that kind of thing, and again does work to give access to the hop-up adjustment inside. You can HK slap it. I'm not going to, because this is really heavily sprung, and I do worry about the longevity of the charging handle if we keep slamming it forward. So perhaps slightly more robust than the one on the PCC45, so that's something to consider if you perhaps are a little bit more heavy-handed with these things. There is no actual bolt release on this. It is the HK slap to release everything. Let's talk about internals. Let's go for the internals first. So both are actually very similar. Obviously the barrel on the PCC45 is ever so slightly longer. Will that actually affect your accuracy over long range? Between these two guns, probably not greatly. There isn't enough barrel there to make that much difference. Both actually come with a slightly tighter barrel than you would usually find on a mid-tier rifle at 603. So that's pretty good. That's a nice thing to have. Certainly if you are going to step these up into a woodland environment, the slightly tighter barrel will just help it be a little bit more consistent over range. Aside from that, the actual gearboxes and internals are very similar. The only thing is that the PCC45 benefits from G&G's 4th generation MOSFET and ETU unit. So we have an electronic trigger on the PCC45 and the standard sort of ever so slightly sloppy trigger on the UMP45. Again, if we talk about authenticity though, people who review the real world UMP45, certainly Garen Thumb and that kind of thing, do say that the triggers on the UMP45 leave a little bit to be desired anyway in the real steel variants. And in my mind, this has carried over beautifully to the G&G model here. I do find the trigger pull ever so slightly long. If I just take it off a safe, it'll allow me to pull it. And we've got a hell of a lot of take up between where the trigger sits and if I just find the brake, it's there. The brake is there, so almost all the way back. And I find that a little bit sloppy, certainly if you're taking this into CQB where you are going to be limited to semi-auto. Finding the brake can be not a challenge, but certainly you're not going to be able to spam the trigger as fast as you can with the PCC45. And the PCC45's trigger is very much akin to clicking a mouse for all intents and purposes. I do enjoy using this. The G&G electronic trigger unit is very quick, very responsive, and can't be argued with really from a CQB perspective where you're going to want things instantaneously. It can just be the difference between winning and losing that firefight. But aside from, as I say, the MOSFET and the ETU, these are actually very similar beasts internally. What that does though, in terms of performance, can be night and day. Obviously, having a MOSFET in this means we can run with the right setup an 11-1 battery. You are going to want to choose the right 11-1 battery. I have heard higher output 11-1s, or certainly the charge of them is capable of still burning out the trigger units. So be careful. To be honest, I actually run this off of sort of 8s or 9s, not 11s. So just for that little bit of safety, and the performance is still noticeably better than the UMP45 in terms of responsiveness. Talking about batteries, let's stay on the topic of batteries. Now, obviously, the UMP45 benefits from having the battery over the gearbox. This is a much deeper affair in terms of girth, and the UMP45, as I say, if we fold the stock, you can see that the battery compartment is at the back here, and this is cavernous. You can fit some really big batteries in here. They are going to be 7.4s because there is no MOSFET, but yeah, loads and loads of space. Very easy to get to, very easy to change a battery in game, and yeah, you'll have no trouble finding something that fits. The PCC45, on the other hand, is slightly more difficult, is possibly a harsh word. To access the battery compartment, we remove the front handguard. Again, it's a no tool situation like it is on the UMP45. You just slide the little lever out, and the handguard, although it's a tight fit, does slide off. And that tight fit actually is purposeful. It does make sure that this wobbles to no degree whatsoever. But that is our battery compartment. And if you're looking for certainly an 11-1 or anything like that, that's going to be a bit of a squeeze. As I say, I run these on slightly smaller batteries anyway, and the performance is still really good. So yeah, it can be a bit of a challenge. So perhaps in some respects the UMP45 wins out in terms of in-game usability and viability of changing batteries. And as you can see, this slides back on. We do have to be a little bit careful of pinching any wires, and we just want to make sure that the lever is down. That slides back into place and then locks on. So yeah, performance wise, this thing is lightning quick, but we do have the downside of finding a battery to fit. Pistol grips. I want to take a second to talk about the pistol grip and the general sort of feel of using these two, because as you can see, the pistol on the PCC45 is noticeably narrower than that of the UMP45, and that for me really does give a much nicer user experience. You feel like the grip placement of this in comparison to the trigger is really nice. We get these funny little finger rests for when you're sitting off of the trigger. Those are ambidextrous as well, they appear on both sides, and it's a nice textured feel to it, but it's small enough that you really feel like you've got a good grip of this thing and can throw it about a little bit. Alternatively, the UMP45, again by design of being authentic to the original one, slightly chunkier grip. This texture for me, certainly with gloves, doesn't feel as good and doesn't feel as grippy, for want of a better term. and yeah, can just detract from the experience a little bit. Those with bigger mitts will have no trouble, but I do think certainly when my children use these two weapons, they are more comfortable with the slightly smaller grip for obvious reasons, for obvious size reasons. If we look at the fire selector as well, the fire selector on both is very good, very positive clicks, you know exactly where you stand with it. Although from a placement and size perspective, I do feel like the PCC's is slightly better. These feel harder to get into full auto if you've got your hand on the weapon already. You almost have to take 2 stabs at it and reposition your thumb. Whereas with the PCC45, it just feels like a much more refined and smoother affair. And that's probably in large part to the smaller and slightly more, what's the word I could use? I could use ergonomic. That's the word I'm looking for. A slightly more ergonomic design to your hand. And you feel like you can manipulate your thumb into position in one go. Aside from that though, like I say, these are very similar beasts. Magazine placement and release is exactly the same on both weapons. And as we've already touched upon, the stocks are identical in pull, in length, in size, and certainly in the finish with their rubberized butt pads and cheek weld sections on both as well. So let's briefly talk about magazines. Now, what comes with both is slightly different. With the PCC45, you get this very nice mock magazine with mock dummy rounds in it. Looks really nice when you're using it, I've got to say. And it comes with a little pre-built-in follower to ensure that every BB is used. These are mid caps. You can buy high caps for the PCC45 as well, but the high cap is actually what comes as standard with the UMP45. And this holds an insane amount of BBs for something that I kind of looked at it and thought it wasn't even going to hold sort of 200 rounds, but it does. It holds closer to 400 and is a real monster, really. The only downside being a high cap, obviously you're constantly winding the winder underneath. Now, I've seen a lot of people asking, and I had a lot of people asking, are these magazines interchangeable? Unfortunately, they are not. They're very similar in size and diameter and shape, as you can see here. Almost pretty much identical actually, but unfortunately the feed is different on each. The PCC45 feeds from the front and the UMP45 feeds from the rear. So there is no interchangeability between the two, if interchangeability is a word. Anyway, like I say, unfortunately they're not interchangeable. Both are very good magazines. I need to get my hands on a few more of the mid caps though, because I just prefer not having to wind the magazine underneath. But yeah, both very good, both feed, and you know, got no complaints with either of them really. So where do I see these weapons and who do I see these weapons for? Well, to answer that, there's obviously the price issue. The UMP45 comes in at around $250 on average, I would say. And the PCC45, the cheapest I've ever seen the PCC45 is $285. And I believe that was in a sale at one point. They do tend to range more in the 300 mark. So taking that price difference into account, if budget is a massive concern to you, then obviously the UMP45 takes the lead in some respects. We have £50 cheaper than the PCC45, which will get you a nice little optic for the top from Amazon or that kind of thing. Maybe it will get you the adapter and a tracer on the front, whatever you want. It's a very, very capable weapon. Does it work in CQB? Absolutely. Its size and shape, it was effectively designed for CQB in terms of its military applications, or certainly law enforcement applications. The SWAT team use it to great effect, and yeah, it thrives in a CQB environment. Is it capable in the woodland as well? Absolutely. That tighter barrel means that it's got really good accuracy over the same sort of ranges as your standard sort of combat masters and that sort of thing. And it is just a very versatile gun that you can take to any engagement situation and not feel outclassed by the players around you. That being said, if you can afford the extra £50 layout on the initial weapon, I would say the PCC45 potentially is the better option. The addition of the electronic trigger unit and the MOSFET, which in turn means we can use a higher output battery, it just means that the performance, I don't want to criticize the performance of the UMP45 because it is good, but essentially the PCC45 is almost electrifying in comparison to the UMP45. It makes so much difference with the trigger and the MOSFET higher output battery. Obviously this also benefits from the tighter barrel, so it's just as capable in the woodland as the UMP45 and longer range engagements, but obviously I would say it's probably a better weapon in the CQB environment with that trigger and the general responsiveness of it. Is it going to last? Absolutely. Both are from G&G. I've never had a problem with any G&G product I've ever bought. They are absolute workhorses all round. As we have mentioned, please use do some checks, check out the current and stuff like that. We don't want you burning out the trigger unit with a high output 11.1. Check the currents, and to be honest, play it safe, go for a slightly less battery. The performance isn't going to suffer that greatly. To all intents and purposes, both are using the same battery, a 7.4. This will still, on a 7.4, outperform the UMP in terms of fire rate and responsiveness. So absolutely nothing to worry about there. As I say, my only real concerns in terms of longevity is the charging handle. It feels a little bit flimsy. But other than that, super little weapon, hugely capable, very, very stylish. I've got to say, I do like the styling of the PCC45. And yeah, oh, and I haven't even mentioned the flared magwell. If you are looking to be a speed demon in terms of reload, then this flared magwell is a crucial piece of kit in comparison to the UMP45. That does have some slight flaring to it, but nothing in comparison to what we get with the PCC45. And you can really just no look slam the mags in. It's a beautiful bit of kit. So there we have it. That is my conclusion on these two weapons. If you can afford the extra budget, I really do think the PCC45 is the superior weapon. However, if you're a new player just starting out, perhaps budget's an issue. Perhaps you're buying this for a loved one. My children use this a lot. This is probably the one you want them to have because it is just that little bit more robust. You know they're not going to break that flimsy charging handle. And you know that all polymer body isn't going to creak and wobble even after it's been dropped on the floor multiple times. So yeah, this is an extremely good workhorse, great value for money. But if you can stretch that little bit of extra budget and it is something for you that you know you're going to take care of and take pride in, I'd go for the PCC45. Okay guys, thank you very much for watching. That has been my look at these two particular offerings from G&G. If it has been of any help to you, then as always, a like and a subscribe is always welcome. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.